Alright, so the video did cut, sorry for that, but we can continue. So if you remember continuous variation, a characteristic or an organism shows many intermediate forms between two extremes, so a lot of changes. Your body mass or your weight, like I mentioned. You can also talk about the height. If you compare the height among organisms of the same species, it may be different. You can also talk about the complexion. Yeah, your complexion, or we can say your skin color. Of course, if you take one from Zambia and take them to America, the complexion or the skin color may actually change. You can also talk about intelligence. Yeah, intelligence can also be classified under this one, because it doesn't mean one's intelligent, always intelligent. It depends with the people that you are found with. They may influence your intelligence. So the question still stands: what are the causes of continuous variation? What causes this type of variation to come about, continuous variation? One, we can simply talk about influence. So this one is actually influenced by the environment. So we can say influenced by the environment. So the environment does play a very important role. So influenced by environmental factors. So we can talk about a lot of environmental factors, such as, like I said, your diet, the climate where you are. All those will play a role to this type of variation. Two, we can simply talk about maybe control by many genes. So control by many genes, and that is what we simply call as being polygenic. So you can call it as being polygenic control by so many genes. Imagine one person is playing with one who is a fifth, one who is a womanizer, one who is a drinks, or one who smokes. Is going to learn a different characteristic from such individuals, and that's the way with the continuous variation. Because it is controlled by so many genes, a characteristic will show this type of variation. Right, so that is what we mean. So now again, we can simply say that characteristics that show this type of variation are normally plotted on a bell-shaped curve. Yeah, so we can simply say characteristics. So we can say that characteristics that show this type of variation are plotted on a bell-shaped curve. So we can talk about a bell-shaped curve. For example, what I mean is that, for example, if you have got maybe you have got the number of people against the characteristics, such as maybe height in humans, because we have got different height as humans. You'll be able to see such a graph. So when you're able to see such a graph, this actually indicates what we are calling as being continuous variation. But the next question that we can talk about, can we state the differences between continuous and discontinuous variation? Well, let's try to briefly talk about what are the differences. So now in an exam, they are going to ask you to state differences between continuous and discontinuous. Differences between continuous and discontinuous variation. Let's talk about what are the differences between continuous and discontinuous variation. Maybe I can slightly put this in a table so that you are able to see clearly what are the differences existing between continuous and discontinuous variation. So let me say maybe this side I do have what I'm calling as being continuous variation. Then this side, let me say I have discontinuous variation. So what you can do, the first thing that you can do, you can actually tell the difference in terms of the definition. So you can actually use the definition. Here, we can simply say characteristics. When I talk about here, I can say characteristic shows many intermediate. So it shows many intermediate forms between two extremes. So a characteristic or individual will show many intermediate forms. But here we did say that characteristic shows a clear, so it shows a clear cut distinct group. That is what we did say. So very clear cut, but here it shows many intermediate forms, many changes. So in terms of definition, you can simply talk about that. Then when I talk about that, I can simply say influenced by the environment. So influenced by the environment. So when I talk about continuous, it is influenced by the environment. But of course, we can simply say, for discontinuous, not influenced. So we can say not influenced by the environment. So it is not influenced by the environment. Another difference that we can simply state between the two is that if you remember what we did talk about, when we talk about continuous variation, polygenic control, that is what we said. Yeah, so we can say this characteristic is simply, controlled by many genes. So it is actually controlled by many genes, and that is what we termed as being polygenic control. It is controlled by many genes, but here we can simply say, controlled by one or a few genes. So that is what we can talk about. Another difference between continuous and discontinuous variation, remember, we can simply say that appearance on graph. So in terms of appearance on the graph, I can maybe say bell-shaped curve here on graph. So when you draw a graph, that one is going to appear as a bell-shaped curve on graph. That's what you need to remember. But here, when we talk about this one, we can simply say, maybe I can say separate bars, or sometimes you can use a pie chart on graph. So that is what is going to happen. Or if you want, you can say like a histogram. That's another difference that you can simply state. Then number 5, you can give in terms of examples to state the differences. We talked about the height, we talked about the weight. You can also talk about the skin color or the complexion. In terms of examples of what we are calling as being, in terms of examples of discontinuous variation, so we did talk about the blood type. We talked about tongue roaring. Sometimes you can also talk about fingerprint, and maybe you can talk about also flower color. So the color of the flower is also discontinuous variation. So in an exam, they're going to tell you to state differences between continuous and discontinuous. So these are some differences that you can actually state when you are giving in the exam. Thank you so much for watching my videos. Watch out for some more videos so that you are able to benefit